Hang on one second. I'm from New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire. That's where I live
Really?
now. Yeah, I've been here my whole life, and yeah, I know that you're a Northeasterner, right? You're born in New York. Is that correct?
I was born in Schenectady, yeah.
Schenectady. What a name.
And I've been through New Hampshire many times.
Have you? Yeah.
Yeah.
I probably ran into you. I probably saw you somewhere because you've always looked familiar to me.
Maybe so.
Yeah. Let me just introduce you for those that are now watching this or listening. So I'm John Ward, and I'm joined by Bob Moriarty. For the latest thing that I'm aware of that Bob's doing, which he might be doing a whole lot more because he's done so much, and we'll get into that. But he's the owner of 321gold.com. You've run around the country, I mean, I'm sorry, around the world, looking for new mining opportunities. I guess I don't know if you say you haven't been traveling lately, but I'll just continue this uh, introduction that Bob has written many books about financial resource investing. Um, Also, a book that I've read very little of up to this point, but a book called The Art of Peace. And even the little I've read, it's astonishing to a guy who doesn't like war movies, and really I don't want to talk about war that much, but it made me feel like wow, a little bit more like what it would have been like to have to make a major decision like you did, Bob, uh, of, that term friendly fire. I got to that part in the book and the way you described it, uh, in making sure that, hey, we do the best we can to not, kill our own, but they were going to be killed anyways, right? So that's kind of a long-winded introduction, but I wanted to give people some basis of what your background is and go from there. So thanks for joining
Good.
us. Yeah. So, I do try to help people financially. That's what I do. I do something called the infinite banking concept, and that basically is using permanent whole life insurance to uh, take back the banking or financing function in their lives. But also, clients of mine, people that are interested, at least looking into the concept, are also uh, not big fans of the stock market. They're nervous. The de-dollarization concept, they hear all that kind of stuff. And, um, of course, I do talk about sound money and, holding some precious metals, um, because this system has been broken for a long time and there's no way out. That's kind of my take. And, just kind of want to, get into the war thing a little bit. You were in Vietnam and you flew, what was it, 832? It was one of those numbers, missions, right? In a matter of
Somewhere there,
20 months.
832 or 834.
834. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You, you
All of
lose
them
track.
matter.
Yeah.
What's that?
You lose track.
Yeah, yeah. And you did that all in a 20-month period, is that correct? Roughly?
Yes. Yes.
Wow. That's a lot of missions. That's
You,
the way I look at it, I mean, is that the most that anybody's ever done in a 20-month period?
uh, it's probably the most in U.S. history.
Wow.
It was very common in World War II for squadrons to be in combat for 6 weeks, and they would be rotated out. So the combat in World War II and Korea was far more intense, but it was far shorter. We did the same thing day after day after day after day. And I went over as a 21-year-old. And back then, we got all our information from television and newspaper. And I was too stupid to realize that the whole war was based on fiction. But since World War II, the United States has sponsored about 250 wars against different countries. And it's all to feed the military industrial complex. They serve no purpose whatsoever. And they cost a lot of money and they kill a lot of people. And I was there long enough to be extremely anti-war. No one wins any war. The only question is who loses the most.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've heard this phrase often that war costs a lot of money. But to me, um, I just kind of want to talk about that a minute because the cost is to you and I or to the American people. That seems to be where the cost really is. Cost in lives and in financial terms. Uh, Ruined lives, deaths, but certainly there's people making money from war, and I think that's what I really want to kind of have your thoughts on that because I know we're doing the same stuff that we've always done, and we're probably trying to do it for financial reasons, to bail ourselves out one more time, which really is never a bailout. It's just kicking the can down the road. But wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, every empire history has collapsed when they started getting involved in military adventurism. And
Mm,
that is fighting wars just to be fighting wars. And there absolutely is a very identifiable group who profit as a result of war. Both Eisenhower and MacArthur, who of course were vastly experienced in war, said that it was a racket and it was being run for the beneficiary of the military industrial complex. And Eisenhower actually called it the congressional military industrial complex. If you notice, Chuck Schumer was just over in Ukraine 2 days before the attack over the weekend on the Russian airfields. And he certainly would have been briefed on that. And he's one of the people who has benefited financially as a result of the war. But to tell you how evil war is, the Ukraine war that the United States started in 1945 has killed somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million Ukrainian soldiers. And that's beyond comprehension. And no one can actually say why it happened or what the purpose is. I mean, the best anybody can come up with is, well, Russia invaded Ukraine, but nobody mentions the $5 billion coup d'etat that the United States sponsored in 2014. Nobody mentions the 14,000 citizens of Donbass who had been shelled by an illegitimate Ukrainian government that the United States had put into power. So it goes on and on and on. And strange enough, right now, we face two potential nuclear conflicts, one in Ukraine and one in Israel. And I don't know if you've even noticed it today. The Ukrainians tried to blow up the bridge from Crimea to Russia. Uh, they planted explosives and
oh,
had two massive explosions. The Ukrainians, there's absolutely no way they can win the war, but they're trying to keep stabbing Russia until Russia uses nuclear weapons. Why Europe would want to destroy Russia is beyond me, because Russia was the economic foundation for Europe. They were supplying cheap natural resources to Europe. So it's destroyed the European economy to have the sanctions on Russia, but they continue to want to attack Russia.
Yeah. And Russia's actually been very helpful to the US too, to America in other certain.
Russia is not the enemy of the United States, or Russia is not the enemy of Europe. And anyone who believes that is ignorant or stupid. If you
Yeah,
do any research into it whatsoever, the Russians today are not the Russians of 50 years ago. And everything that's happened since 1990 is NATO and the United States and Ukraine lying through their teeth. The Belgian defense minister came out a week ago with something that was very telling. He said that it was absolutely vital that there be a ceasefire in Ukraine so they could move NATO troops into Ukraine. And of course, the war exists because of trying to bring NATO into Ukraine. And
right,
they make no bones about it. Both the French and the English have said they want to send troops to Ukraine. And it's patently absurd. The UK has 75,000 people in its army. There are Girl Scout troops in London that are bigger than that.
right, right. Yeah, it sounds like, oh, if we push Russia to nuclear use of nuclear power, then now we have the reason to get everybody else involved, and we have our World War III, right? That seems to be
Strange enough, that's exactly right. But there's no one that I have ever paid any attention to or listened to who could convince me that World War III was a great idea. Why people would even encourage it is it's simply beyond me. The same thing's true with Israel and Iran. Iran is not the enemy of Israel. Israel is the enemy of Iran, and Iran is not the enemy of the United States. Now, if the United States had supported Iran since 1948, same way they support Israel since 1948, we would have the best friendship in the world. Okay. The relationship between the United States and Israel is evil, it's wrong, it's genocide, and the United States is paying for all the weapons that are killing innocent women and children in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the West Bank. And that's just simply wrong.
yeah. You know, I don't know the number obviously, but there's probably as many books written about the corruption of war and financial corruption, the corruption of our system. Um, the problem, as you know, is that we don't have enough readers, right? We don't
Well,
have,
strange enough, we don't have enough paper. Okay. We don't have enough paper because it is so corrupt. You could not possibly keep up with it. They don't grow trees fast enough. The
yeah,
corruption is outpacing the growth of trees. Were
yeah,
you aware that after the election and after Harris lost the election, the Department of Energy issued $93 billion in grants to Democrat NGOs?
no,
That's more money than they had handed out in the history of the Department of Energy. and it was all fraud and it was all corruption. And the strange thing is, we don't even talk about it. We don't even pay any attention to it. And we really should. And if anything, there should be 100 times more books written about it because the United States government has turned so corrupt. And I would love to blame the Democrats for it because they certainly are guilty. However, the Republicans are just as guilty. Donald Trump just went over to Qatar and managed to convince them to give him a $400 million aircraft that's going to take $2.5 billion to refurbish. And the plan is that when he's out of office, the aircraft will be donated to his uh, library. And this just give me a break, Donald. Haven't you got enough airplanes? Yeah, you do not need Qatar buying airplanes for you. That's just like too corrupt. The day before he took office, he came out with the meme coin.
Yeah.
83% of the people who invested in the meme coin lost money. You can now bribe Donald Trump through Bitcoin. And I'm going, wait a minute, okay. My problem with corruption and money, and this is true of Soros, it's true of Bill Gates, it's true of all those multi-billionaires. Can't you ever stop? Do you ever have enough money? You don't have to keep stealing, and that's what it's coming to. Where is it going to go? I think it's like a drunk. I think you have to hit bottom and you have to swear off the alcohol and you have to stop. And we're nowhere near there. And while there's a lot of things that I approve of Donald Trump doing, the amount of corruption that he's bringing to the presidency is pretty appalling.
Yeah, thank you for all that. I don't pick sides because I think both sides are so bad. You can't, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm 63. I say to people my age, I said, what side matters? I mean, you can't say one's going to be better than the other because they've been both in power my whole life, my whole adult life that I've paid attention to this. We've had Republicans and we've had Democrats. We've had conservatives and we've had liberals. And we haven't improved anything. Things have only
Well,
gotten worse.
it's one snake with two heads.
Yeah.
And strange enough, countries get the world's reserve currency for about 80 to 82 years. We're at 81 years. And I think it's fairly obvious. Uh, Trump was elected as a peace president. He was elected on a promise that he was going to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Well, he's the one supplying the money and the weapons for Israel. He's the one supplying the weapons for Ukraine. The 24 hours passed about 4 months ago, and he wants to increase the defense budget by 13%. Now, what is happening in the world that would justify $130 billion increase in the defense budget? Because if you know, I would like to know because I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we got to keep paying for that war machine. You know, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I've been reading both War is a Racket by Smedley Butler and also Common Sense 2.0, Thomas Paine. And I'm wondering, when you're reading two books roughly about the same concept at the same time, you get mixed up on which one was saying what. Um, but I noticed that I think it's in Smedley's book, um, that when did we change the name from the Department of War to the Department of Defense, you know? Like that was obviously semantics and it sounds better, right?
Exactly. And Smedley Butler, of course, was a Marine, and of course, I was a Marine. Uh,
Right.
you do realize that I was the person who wrote Common Sense 2.0.
Oh, I did not know that. I didn't know you were the one that tried to hide who it really was because you said it's not about the writer. Okay. Well, I know I saw it on your site and I was like, but I didn't put two and two together. No, I didn't know that.
Uh, the original Thomas Paine wrote the most widely read book in American history. And he was a master wordsmith. He came up with some of the greatest quotes I've ever heard. And he encouraged the colonies to rebel
Okay.
against Britain and seek their own freedom. And he gave the reasons for it. And strange enough, Common Sense 2.0, there are things in our society that we know are wrong and nothing is being done about them. I'll give you something that I absolutely will give credit to Trump for. Trump came out and said, okay, if you're selling pharmaceuticals in the United States, you have to sell them at the cheapest price in the world.
Mhm.
So if the UK is paying 1 cent for aspirin, you cannot charge over 1 cent per aspirin in the United States. And the difference in cost of pharmaceuticals between the United States and the rest of the world is absolutely obscene. I take high blood pressure medication, and in the United States, the medication costs $105 a month. Here, it costs $5 a month. My best friend came
Oh,
over 2 weeks ago, and Air France lost his bag. And he has both a thyroid condition and he has diabetes. And he has medications that he's supposed to take every day. Well, a friend of mine took us out. And we were playing tourists in a little small French town. And Quentin's wife said, "Do you think it would be possible to go into a pharmacy and ask them if they could give us a week's supply of this medication?" I said, well, damn, I don't know. I mean, that would be a really good idea. So I talked to my French friend and said, can we try this? So we went into a pharmacy. She did the translation. Quentin told the pharmacist what the medication was that he was using. So she gave him a 30-day supply of each of the medications and said if he didn't get his bag back, if he needed to come back, and they would fill the prescription again.
mhm.
It was €9.
Oh,
So
wow.
he's looking at the bill and he's absolutely dumbfounded.
Yeah. You got this
He
wrong,
pays
right?
exactly. He pays $400 for a blood test. I pay 35. Now that's just crazy. The United States has the most expensive medical system in the world, and it's the least effective, and we have the most sick people, and the uh, I'm trying to think of the term for it. The amount of time that Americans live is actually decreasing. Our
Yeah.
longevity is going down because of our healthcare system. And of course, you can't get anybody to change the system because everybody's got a vested interest in making as much money as possible. So the world is changing, and it's changing in a way that's going to affect everybody in the world literally in the next year or two. And some of the changes can be good, and a lot of the changes going to be negative.
Yeah. Yeah. So life expectancy, mortality, uh, obviously the opioid issue here in this country brought those numbers down, right? Um, but
I don't know. The entire illegal drug problem, there's no question it's a serious problem. And
yeah,
everything that we have done has made it worse. But the number of people killed by perfectly legitimate prescribed drugs is very
mm,
high in the United States. The U.S. Medical system kills a lot of people, and let's go into COVID for just a minute. So
sure.
I was in the Marine Corps for 6 years. I was in Vietnam for 20 months. I flew over 800 missions of combat, but I was also an intelligence officer, and I had gone through intelligence school at Fort Holabird in Maryland in 1967. COVID was bio warfare. COVID was a bad flu that was modified by the United States government illegally, and it was designed to force vaccines on the population. And we know how dangerous the vaccines are. There have been tens of thousands of studies. They're killing uh, they're killing the babies of pregnant women. Czechoslovakia just came out with a report, and they concluded that the so-called vaccines had resulted in the deaths of 200,000 babies who were either stillborn or had miscarriages, and that's just in Czechoslovakia. So we know it's dangerous, and the CDC is still recommending that these so-called vaccines are given to people, including young people and including children. The country that has the very best medical records in the world, as far as I can tell, is Israel. And there wasn't a single person under the age of 40 who died of COVID. Okay. There were people who died who had COVID, but they had
Others-
comorbidity. Okay. So
Morbidities, yeah, yeah.
they didn't die strictly of COVID. So COVID wasn't particularly dangerous, but the vaccines have killed tens of millions of people and destroyed the health of people. And you don't hear anybody discussing it anymore because all of the social media would cut you off if you mentioned the word COVID. It's really funny to me. We know it was a bioweapons program 4 years after the fact, but you're still not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, so much for freedom of speech. Um,
Ah, whoa, whoa, whoa. What do
yeah,
you say? What
I
you
know.
been reading the Bill of Rights again?
Yeah, yeah, I have actually. And yeah, I think that's what we've done. We've made it the wars are between the people, we're upset at each other. That's the
Yeah, but
system they've
all of this was predicted. Okay.
yeah.
If your listeners have not read The Fourth Turning, they should
Mhm.
go buy the book on Amazon. It was written 26 years ago. There are two authors to it, one of which is still around. And they said that there are four periods. Okay. Every 80 years or so, you go through four periods. And the last period is the crisis period. And governments tend to go totally totalitarian. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Now, the interesting thing about the book that everybody tends to forget this is that a lot of people react to totalitarianism and they fight totalitarianism. And you've got these green shoots popping up of people who truly want to be independent. And the book doesn't come to a conclusion and say, yes, you go full totalitarian, or yes, you'll be totally free. But it says there is this conflict going on, and it can go either way. And I am astonished at how accurate the book was. And this is a book written 26 years ago. Congress just passed a law. It hadn't been passed by the Senate, but Congress just passed a law that essentially uh, said that you cannot talk about uh, Gaza, you can't talk about genocide, you can't talk about what's happening in Israel or in the Middle East, or you're an anti-Semite. It is so contrary to the Bill of Rights that how anybody could pass that is astonishing to me. But what it's done is it's made it obvious to anybody who wants to open their eyes the degree to which the Israel lobby literally controls the United States. There are 38 states that if you are elected to office or if you take a government contract, you have to sign a document saying that you support Israel. You can criticize the Pope. You can criticize Trump. You can criticize Harris. You can criticize Buddhists. You can criticize elephants if you want to. You just can't criticize Israel. And that's simply patently absurd. How does this tiny shit for brains, little meaningless country in the Middle East with 9 million people control the United States? And they do it through bribery. Okay, it's that simple. They have bought Congress. You're not allowed to say that, of course. You're an anti-Semite, but they own Congress. Every person in the House of Representatives, with the exception of Thomas Massey, has his own APAC minder in his office, and they are told what to vote for and what to vote against. And that's just bizarre. Okay, I wouldn't want the UK controlling us. I wouldn't want China controlling us. I wouldn't want Russia controlling us. I certainly wouldn't want Ukraine controlling us, but we're controlled by Israel. And everybody knows it and refuses to talk about it because if you talk about it, you'll be criticized.
Yeah, again, back to these two books. Your book, Common Sense 2.0, and War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. Um, this idea that we're always on defense, but we're actually way beyond our borders, in these mercenary wars. Smedley Butler in War is a Racket talks about, well, how do we stop this, right? Well, we can't be more than, ships can't be more than 200 miles off of the coast. We should have our young potential soldiers. They're the ones that can do the voting on whether we go to war or not. And I forget what the third one was. Maybe
Well,
but yeah.
nobody's talked about this, and we should talk about it. Smedley Butler was the most highly decorated Marine in history. He
Yeah.
was not just a Marine. I was just a Marine. Okay.
Hmm.
He was the
That's
most highly
humble.
decorated Marine in history. So
Right.
when he spoke with great confidence and great accuracy, and we should pay attention to it. Now, bear in mind, I grew up, I was born in 1946. I grew up in middle class uh, America. I believed everything I was told. I was an ROTC in high school.
Okay.
I joined the Marine Corps because young men faced the draft back in the 50s and 60s. And I was literally handed the opportunity to get into flight training when I was 18 years old. Okay.
Hmm.
When I was 20, I was the youngest fighter pilot in the entire world. Nobody else would dream of handing a $5 million aircraft to a 20-year-old kid. And I was a 20-year-old kid. I have lots of friends in this tiny village here, and I've got two sisters who own a hotel. One's 30 and one's 29. And I think of them as children, okay, which is
Yeah.
really embarrassing because, I was in the Marine Corps trying to kill people when I was 21. But the idea that uh, war is good, it's not good. And
Right.
the greatest celebration is not at the beginning of the war, it's at the end of the war. And
Yes.
the best way to win any war is to not fight the war. And I am terrified. I am convinced we are closer to World War III than we have ever been in my lifetime. And the thing that scares me the most is nobody's speaking out. Nobody's trying to stop that.
Yeah. Yeah. So much to say. I was talking to a friend yesterday, and she lives in Boulder, Colorado, and there was um, somebody that was charged. There was uh, those cocktails that were being thrown. I forget what do you call those?
Molotov cocktails,
Yeah, Molotov
a
cocktails.
homemade flamethrower.
Yep, yep. And I said, well, what started as protests, I guess there's protests about, Palestine and, whatever. It's all
Well, that
about what,
that particular incident, it was perfectly legal. It was perfectly safe. There was no hate to it, and there were people who were saying they wanted the hostages in Gaza released. And as biased as I am about the war, I fully support the hostages being released. I wish they had never been taken hostage in the first place,
Mhm.
but Israel has 10,000 hostages, and nobody talks about them. But
Mm.
anyone who supports uh, Hamas releasing hostages, I'm fully in favor of. And someone wanted to use that, and it was truly a hate crime. And a number of people were injured, and he's throwing Molotov cocktails and set up a spray gun as a modified flamethrower. When when you take some action, many times it will cause a counter reaction. And the attack on Gaza and the genocide that's going on in Gaza has made a lot of people very angry, and angry enough that even people who support release of the hostages face hatred and face people attacking them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for that. For adding to that story. From what I understand, what I said to her was that that's what happens is you've got two sides, protesting. There's no formality to it, like, hey, this is the time you can come out and protest and speak if you want, and then maybe this is the time, or, and I don't even know if that would work, but we seem to be always protest because we say, well, we've got free speech, we have the right to protest. But protests to me don't really seem to work because we're not talking to the right people. We're not talking to the people that have control over what's going on there. And then you say, 38 states and you get to keep your contract as long as you're pro-Israel, right? You don't say anything negative about Israel. And, you know, it just to me it's a waking up process that you're not going to get from, I mean, I throw myself in your generation in the sense that, we grew up watching the news and there's still so many, even of my siblings, the older ones in particular, I'm the youngest of six, they watch the nightly news. In fact, they won't watch it now because they're not supporters of Trump. So they say, well, then we're not going to watch now. And I said, well, that's probably going to help your health, like you're probably going to
There you
live
go.
longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a positive. And but we need to go outside and actually pick up books. And the reason, one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you was to share this message of what's already been written. And as you say, there isn't enough trees that could be cut down to write the story of the corruption and the criminality of the war machine. And people feel like, yeah, we are defending ourselves, and the defense happens on our own land. Otherwise, if you go to somebody else's land, that's offense, right? I don't know if I'm stealing from your book, but
Well,
that's
exactly. I mean, I talk to a lot of people who say, congratulations for your service. Thank you.
hmm,
Wait a minute. I was killing people who are not enemies of mine. They
right.
never done anything
Yeah,
to me.
yeah,
And we were in their country. I don't fault the Vietnamese at all. They were the bravest people I've ever run into in my life. And all they wanted was independence. And we wanted to control who they voted for, how they lived, what they did. And I've been back a couple of times since then. Vietnam's an absolutely wonderful country, a wonderful civilization. It's nicest people in the world. And something that's funny, and every Vietnam vet that you ever talk to who has gone back to Vietnam will tell you the same story. You ask the Vietnamese, what do you think about the war? Every Vietnamese answers exactly the same way, and it's always a surprise to Americans. The Americans ask, what do you think about the war? And the Vietnamese said, what war? Do you mean the French war? Or do you mean the Japanese war? Or do you mean the Second French War? Or do you mean the American War? Or do you mean the Chinese War? And when you look at it in those terms, the
yikes.
Vietnamese were fighting for their independence from 1930 until 1980. And they were absolutely convinced they were going to win. And it took the lives of millions of Vietnamese, but they did win. And I absolutely congratulate them for that. And everything that we were told was a lie. We were not fighting for independence. We were doing exactly the opposite. We were fighting for slavery of the Vietnamese. And they said, we don't approve. And strange enough, there is a conflict going on now. And it's very important to talk about. It's a conflict between the debt-based system of the West and the resource-based system of the East. And it's obvious if you just step back a little bit, if you educate yourself, the debt-based system of the West is collapsing. The European Union is collapsing. You've got riots in Paris. The British government is on the verge of collapse. The Polish government just elected somebody who wants to take Poland out of the EU. There is this conflict because if you have a debt-based system, if you are in debt, you are a slave. And people are waking up to the fact that that's a very negative thing to do. So Russia and India and China and Brazil and South Africa, they're not uh, they're not doing exactly the right thing, but they've got the right attitude. And they're saying, we want to change the system. We don't have all the solutions, but we know all the problems. And I think that's a good thing. So there's this giant conflict going on that very few people recognize. And certainly the financial situation, we should get into this a little bit in the world between the Bank of Japan, the Japanese bond market, the carry trade, the U.S. Bond market. We got some really terrible things happening internally. and there's going to be a lot of changes. Now, there's a really good article on unz.com. I don't even know how to pronounce his name. It's spelled UNZ, Ron UNZ, and he was a candidate for, uh, I think, Congress from California. And he had gone to Harvard, and I think he was selected as most likely to succeed. And he talks about what started World War II. And the article is so topical and it's so good. And he points out that Winston Churchill was a drunk and he was a financial spendthrift and he was constantly broke, and he had people who supported him financially, and obviously when you support somebody financially, they do what they're told to do. So Winston Churchill was extremely anti-Germany because of his benefactors. And Roosevelt was doing the same thing because in 1938, we had another dip in the stock market. We had a big crash from 1929 to 1932. And then we had another crash from 1933 until 1938. And Roosevelt saw a world war as a good solution to dragging the United States out of the Depression. So the article convinced me to look further into it, that actually Churchill and Roosevelt had far more to do with starting World War II than Hitler or Stalin did.
Yep. Yeah, well, it's funny, right? Because we put all these people on a pedestal, right? They're
Well,
all,
here's what's funny, and this is good. We are the alternative media. Okay. Now, I am not going to tell you or try to convince anybody that everything you read on the alternative media is true, because it's not true. We know it's not true.
sure.
However, 100% of what the government tells you and 100% of what the mainstream media tells you is a lie.
Yeah.
Sometimes in the alternative media, 50% of what you're told is a lie, but that leaves 50% that's true. So if you actually would spend some time looking at alternative media and listening to alternative voices, you'll get the truth every once in a while, but you'll never get it if you're reading the newspaper or the New York Times or listening to the radio. So it's an interesting situation. We have access to far more information than we ever have. And all these guys that we looked up to and we worship because of their position, what has come out since Trump has taken office about how corrupt the Democrats, the Biden administration were, is just absolutely astonishing. I'm cynical. And the
Okay.
strange thing is, it doesn't make any difference how cynical I get. I just can't keep up. And they were so dirty, okay? But look at the Trump administration. The head of the FBI and his assistant just came out a week ago and said Epstein didn't commit suicide.
Oh, I hadn't heard
When
that.
they tell me that there really is a tooth fairy, if they can convince me that there really is a tooth fairy, I'll buy the bullshit about Epstein committing suicide. But until they convince me the tooth fairy is real, I ain't buying it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, wow. As the saying goes, a lot to unpack there. But I want to talk a little bit about, and we can get into all this, but are you familiar with a gentleman named Jacques Franco? Have you ever heard of him?
I don't think so.
I think Jacques lived to be 101, maybe died in 2017. And he created this little town within a town in Venus, Florida. Now it's referred to as the Venus Project. And he'd been talking about this for so long, but we have a monetary based system, obviously, and he said we should have a resource based economy. Of course, his his ideal situation is that we would all collaborate globally, that we, I know that's a stretch because I'm so cynical to think that can that ever happen? It is like trying to create heaven on earth. Could we actually just work together and say, hey, you have these resources, we have these resources. Uh, you might not need, what I have, but we all have it. It's all here. All the resources are here. Honestly, the money
Uh,
is the problem. The money system.
Strange enough, that is 100% accurate. And I'll go a little bit further. When Nixon took us off the gold standard in August of 71, he broke the link between money and reality. And ever
True.
since 1971, money has been utter fiction. So when you don't know what value is, because all you have is price, then you make decisions that are wrong decisions. And clearly, as wealthy as the West is, we've gone down the wrong path. Okay, we have tons of wealth, but people are trying to hoard it, and instead of working together, they're working against each other. And we've allowed tiny groups of people to control the medical industry, to control the insurance industry, to control the weapons industry. And they are interested in their welfare and against our welfare. Now, I'm going to have to go in about 5 minutes because I've got another interview. Is what else should we be talking about?
Well, I think I would like one of the thoughts I had was, we have a generation, a young generation. I don't know what generation we call them, but let's just say anybody from uh, early 20s to maybe even up to 40, um, that wants to enter the casino all the time. Again, this is not financial advice. We got to have that disclaimer. But the idea of what do you say to young people um, on how to protect themselves from this collapsing system, this system that's going to implode and most likely happen in their lifetime and set them up for the Greater Depression if they don't do some of what you might recommend.
Well, I'm going to give you a suggestion, and strange enough, you have the answer in your hand and you don't realize it. Go
Okay.
to the Art of Peace and read the last two pages. I wrote that book in 2016, and I predicted that we were going to have the world's first worldwide revolution. We're undergoing the first worldwide revolution right now. And the young people today are at least aware there's a problem, and that's a good start. Okay, that people need to educate themselves. You read the last two pages, you're going to sit there and say, holy cow, how did
Okay.
he figure this out 10 years ago? I predicted exactly what's happening in Syria. I predicted the banking system was going to collapse. Okay,
Mhm.
the end of the book, I said, in the future, we're going to have far less government. And the reason we're going to have far less government is because we cannot afford the level of government that we have today. And everybody understands that. They just don't take it to the nth degree. And the nth degree is you're going to have less government because you can't afford the level of government that you've got now. And the reason you can't afford it, Okay. Or actually, the reason you don't understand you can't afford it is because you got this fake money. I look at gold at $3,500 an ounce, and I am absolutely astonished. That's a really big number. When I was, let's see, 20, I was buying US $20 gold pieces. It was just short of an ounce of gold for $38.
Yeah.
Those would be uh, $3,500 now.
Yeah.
So
I,
we know
yeah.
there's a problem, and the solution is literally to educate themselves. And I am going to have to be very rude
Yeah.
and hang up because I've got another interview.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this time, Bob. No, you're not rude at all. It's been a pleasure. Thanks. And I hope we can do this again. I enjoyed it, and I think we'd have a lot more to kind of bounce
Good deal.
around.
When you post that, send me the link, please.
I absolutely will. Okay. Thanks again.
Bye.
Yeah. Have a great day, Bob. Bye.